He thought he was saving a tourist, but in reality he was helping murderers cover their tracks. The silence of the Copper Creek Lodge was usually a comfort to Mark, a heavy, velvet blanket that settled over the Alaskan wilderness once the generators hummed down for the night. But tonight the silence felt predatory. It was June, and the midnight sun was dipping just below the horizon, bathing the 12 scattered cabins in a bruised, twilight purple that refused to fade into true darkness. Mark, a 23-year-old seasonal caretaker looking for solitude after college, sat in the main office, the ledger open before him, listening to the static hiss of the landline, their only tether to the world beyond the mountains. The door to the lodge burst open, shattering the quiet. Mark jumped, his chair scraping violently against the wood floor. Standing in the doorway were David and Amanda, the couple from Cabin 7. They were breathless, their faces flushed in the dim light, bringing with them a gust of cool air and the frantic energy of people who had seen something terrible. "It's Troy," Amanda gasped, her hands trembling as she clutched the doorframe. "He's gone, Mark. You have to help us." Mark stood up, his instincts instantly on high alert. He had watched the trio for the past 3 days. David, loud and charismatic, always cracking jokes that felt slightly too aggressive. Amanda, quiet and watchful. And Troy, their friend, who seemed to shrink whenever David entered a room. "What do you mean, gone?" Mark asked, stepping around the desk. "Did he wander off the trail?" David stepped forward, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the chill. "We got into a fight," he said, his voice tight, controlled. "Stupid argument. He stormed off toward the bathhouse about an hour ago to cool down. We waited, but he has not come back. We went to look, and, Mark, it's wild out there. Bears, the river. We see not find him." Mark looked at the clock on the wall. It was past 11 o'clock p.m. "Okay, stay calm. I need to call the troopers. Standard procedure for a missing person after dark." He reached for the landline receiver, but David's hand shot out, slamming down on the desk next to the phone. The sudden violence of the movement made Mark flinch. "No time," David snapped, his eyes wide and unblinking. "The nearest station is 40 miles away. By the time they get a chopper in the air or a cruiser down that gravel road, Troy could be halfway down a ravine. We need to look now." "David's right," Amanda pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. She looked terrified, her knuckles white. "Please, Mark. You know the property. You know where the hazards are. Just help us check the perimeter. If we do not find him in 20 minutes, then we call. Please." Mark hesitated. The rulebook in his head screamed call the authorities, but the look on Amanda's face, sheer, unadulterated panic, tugged at his empathy. He looked at the phone, then at the dark window. If Troy had fallen and broken a leg, 40 miles was a death sentence in this temperature. "Okay," Mark said, grabbing his heavy-duty flashlight and the bare spray from the wall. 20 minutes. We stick together. No one separates." He did not see the quick, sharp glance David shot at Amanda. A look that was not relief, but something colder, like a calculation resolving itself. Mark unlocked the door and stepped out into the twilight, the gravel crunching loudly under his boots. He felt the weight of the wilderness pressing in on them, but as he led them toward the tree line, he could not shake the feeling that the most dangerous thing in these woods was not a bear or a ravine, but the two people breathing heavily behind him. The woods behind the lodge were dense, a tangle of spruce and willow that seemed to absorb the beam of Marcus' flashlight. The air was thick with mosquitoes, their high-pitched whine providing a maddening soundtrack to the search. "Troy!" Mark shouted, his voice echoing flatly against the trees. "Troy, can you hear us?" "Troy, stop screwing around," David bellowed. His voice was too loud, too angry for someone worried about an injured friend. Mark stopped, turning to face them. "David, keep it down. If he is hurt, we need to be able to hear him call back." David bristled, his jaw clenching. "I know how to look for my friend. Okay? He probably went towards the old mining road. We should check there." Mark frowned. "The mining road is west. You said he went to the bathhouse. That's east, towards the river bluff. Why would he go west? He was confused, Amanda interjected quickly, her voice shrill. He was dizzy. Maybe he got turned around. Mark swept his flashlight beam over them. David was agitated, bouncing on the balls of his feet, his eyes darting into the shadows. Amanda was hugging herself, shivering violently. It was not just the cold. It was fear, but looking at them now, Mark realized the fear seemed directed at him, not the woods. We check the bathhouse first, Mark commanded, gripping the flashlight tighter. That was his last known location. He turned and marched east, ignoring David's protests. As they approached the small wooden structure of the bathhouse, the beam of Marcus' light caught something on the ground. The dirt was churned up near the entrance, fresh and deep, as if a heavy struggle had taken place. A wooden bench was overturned. What happened here? Mark asked, crouching down. That's where they fought, Amanda whispered. Mark shined the light closer. There were dark droplets on the wooden steps, rust-colored, drying. Is that blood? Mark asked, his stomach dropping. He got a nosebleed, David said instantly. High blood pressure. Look, he is not here, Mark. We wasting time. We need to check the road. Mark stood up slowly. The pattern of the struggle, the overturned bench, the blood. It did not look like a nosebleed. It looked like an assault. A cold realization washed over him. They are not looking for him. They are steering me away. I'm calling the police, Mark said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. This is a crime scene now. He turned back toward the lodge, walking fast. Mark, wait. David called out, hurrying after him. Mark ignored him, breaking into a jog. He reached the main office, threw the door open, and lunged for the phone. He lifted the receiver. Silence. No static. No hum. Just dead air. He pulled the unit from the wall. The cord had not been pulled out. It had been severed clean, the copper wires glinting in the office light. Someone had cut it with tools. The lines must be down, David said from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, blocking the exit. His face was shadowed, but his posture was relaxed, menacingly so. Storm, probably. There has not been a storm in 3 days, Mark said, backing away until his legs hit the desk. Strange, David murmured. He stepped inside, Amanda following close behind like a ghost. Well, looks like we on our own until morning, Mark. So, about that search. Mark looked at the cut wire, then at David's hands. There were scratches on David's forearms. Fresh, red welts that looked like fingernail marks. I need to check the generator, Mark lied, his mind racing. If the lines are down, the power might surge. He did not wait for permission. He brushed past David, expecting a hand to grab him, but David just watched him go with a smirk. Mark sprinted not to the generator, but to the darkness behind cabin 7. He needed to know what they were hiding. If they had hurt Troy, they must have evidence. He crouched by the window of their cabin. Inside, a duffel bag sat on the bed. It was unzipped. Sticking out of the top was a hotel towel, stained a deep, horrifying crimson. Next to it lay a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters. Mark clamped a hand over his mouth to stifle a scream. He was not looking for a lost hiker. He was trapped in the wilderness with 2 people who had just butchered their friend. Mark spent the next 4 hours in a state of suspended terror. He could not run. David had the keys to the only jeep, and running into 40 miles of wilderness at night was suicide. He had to play along. He had to survive until dawn. He returned to the main lodge, feigning defeat. Generator is fine, he said, his voice cracking. We should wait for light. It's too dangerous. David agreed, surprisingly easily. The 3 of them sat in the main lobby, the silence stretching taut like a wire ready to snap. David paced, his energy manic. Amanda curled on the sofa, staring at nothing. Every time Mark shifted in his chair, David's eyes snapped to him. Predatory, calculating. He was not worried about Troy. He was figuring out what to do with Mark. Around 4:30 a.m., the sky began to lighten, turning from purple to a cold, steel gray. "I'm going to drive to town," David announced suddenly, standing up. "I'll get the cops myself." "I should go," Mark said, standing up too quickly. "I know the roads." "No." David stepped into his personal space, smelling of sweat and metallic fear. "You stay here with Amanda. Keep the lodge open in case Troy comes back." It was a trap. Mark knew it. If David left, he would disappear, leaving Mark with the accomplice and the crime scene. Or worse, David would come back with a weapon. "We stick together," Mark insisted, gripping the back of the chair. "Company policy." David's eyes narrowed. He opened his mouth to argue, perhaps to threaten, when a sound vibrated through the floorboards. A low thumping. Thup, thup, thup. It grew louder, shaking the window panes. David froze, his face drained of color, turning a sickly, ash gray. "What is that?" "Helicopter," Mark breathed, his knees nearly buckling with relief. "That SA State Trooper chopper." "Why?" David whispered, panic finally cracking his facade. "Who called them?" "The lines are cut." Mark did not answer. He ran to the door, bursting out onto the porch just as the blue and white helicopter descended into the clearing, kicking up a whirlwind of dust and gravel. 2 troopers jumped out, ducking under the rotors. Paramedic followed. David and Amanda stumbled out onto the porch behind Mark. David immediately put on a mask of confused concern. "Thank God!" he shouted over the engine noise, walking toward the troopers with his hands up in a gesture of helplessness. "Officer, our friend, he's missing. We've been looking all night." The lead trooper did not smile. He did not lower his hand from his holster. He walked straight past David to Mark. "Are you the caretaker?" the trooper shouted. "Yes," Mark yelled back. "They said their friend vanished, but the phone lines were cut." "He did not vanish," the trooper said grimly, turning to look at David, whose confident smile was beginning to twitch. "What?" David stammered. We could not find him." "We found him," the trooper said. "Or rather, a trucker did. 2 miles downstream, crawling onto the Hall Road." The world seemed to stop spinning. Mark looked at David, and for the first time he saw the man clearly. The charisma was gone, stripped away to reveal a hollow, desperate cruelty. "He is alive?" Amanda squeaked, her voice trembling not with relief, but with absolute devastation. "Barely," the trooper said, his voice hard as iron. "He took 4 stab wounds to the abdomen and chest. But he was conscious enough to talk before he went into shock. He told us exactly who did it." The paramedic rushed past them toward the bathhouse area to secure the scene. The trooper turned to David. "David Senders, put your hands behind your back. Now." David did not move. He stared at the helicopter, then at the woods, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. For a second, Mark thought he might lunge for the knife he knew was hidden in that cabin. But the fight had left him. David sagged, the arrogance evaporating into the morning mist. He turned his head slowly and locked eyes with Mark. In that look, there was no apology. There was only a chilling realization. The handcuffs clicked. As the troopers separated them, reading them their rights, Mark stood on the porch, the adrenaline crashing out of his system, leaving him shaking. He watched the scene unfold with a clarity that hurt. The pieces fell into place with sickening precision. The delay, the insistence on searching the woods, the argument about the phone. They had not wanted Mark to help find Troy. They wanted to keep Mark busy. They needed a witness to corroborate their story of the tragic disappearance. They needed Mark to say, "Yes, we searched everywhere. He must have fallen in the river." But more than that, as Mark watched David being shoved into the back of the helicopter, he realized the terrifying truth of the last few hours. David had kept positioning himself between Mark and the exit. David had insisted on splitting up in the dark. David had the wire cutters. If the truck driver had not found Troy, if the police had not arrived at that exact moment, Mark would have been the next tragic accident. A caretaker who slipped and fell while searching for a guest. A loose end tied off in the silence of the Alaskan bush. Mark looked at the dark tree line one last time. The wilderness was beautiful, but it was indifferent. It would have hidden his body just as easily as it had hidden Troy's. He walked back into the office, picked up his bag, and walked out the door. He did not lock up. He got in his truck and drove, leaving the keys in the ignition and the ledger open on the desk. He never went back to Alaska. But even now, years later, whenever a room gets too quiet, he can still hear the phantom sound of a dial tone that is not there, and the crunch of gravel behind him, footsteps approaching in the dark.